Rain poured relentlessly over the city that night, turning the streets into rivers of glistening asphalt, reflecting the neon lights of storefronts and flickering street lamps. People scurried past, umbrellas battling against the wind, cars honking as tires splashed through puddles. Among them, a young woman staggered, clutching her swollen belly, soaked to the bone, her face pale and drawn with exhaustion. Her name was Clara, and just hours earlier, her husband had thrown her out into the storm, leaving her with nowhere to go. Fear and despair clung to her like the wet clothes plastered to her skin, each step heavier than the last. She had no money, no family willing to take her in, and a life growing inside her that depended entirely on her survival. The world had turned its back on her in the cruelest possible way, and every distant flash of lightning seemed to echo the anger and betrayal she had endured. Meanwhile, at the edge of the same street, James, a janitor at a nearby hospital, was finishing his late-night shift. His uniform was tired and stained, his hands rough from years of scrubbing floors that no one noticed, yet he walked with quiet dignity and a heart that refused to harden, despite life's relentless hardships. He noticed Clara almost immediately, the way her body trembled in the rain, the desperate, pleading eyes that seemed to scream for help without uttering a word. Without hesitation, James approached her, extending his coat over her shivering shoulders and offering a gentle, steady hand. "Hey, you shouldn't be out here like this," he said softly, his voice cutting through the roar of the storm. Clara looked up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. Here was a stranger, a poor man by any measure, yet his presence radiated warmth and safety, in a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty. At that moment, neither knew that this chance encounter would not only save a life, but also forge a bond that would challenge every expectation of love, kindness, and courage. James led Clara down a narrow alleyway behind the hospital, away from the flashing neon lights and the judgmental eyes of passers-by. His coat was heavy but warm, and despite being soaked himself, he refused to leave her in the storm. Clara shivered violently, her teeth chattering, and tears mingled with the rain on her cheeks. She tried to protest, to tell him she couldn't impose on a stranger, but James simply shook his head. "Right now, you don't have to worry about anything but getting dry," he said firmly, his eyes soft but resolute. There was a calm authority in his presence that made her want to believe in safety again, even if only for a fleeting moment. He guided her to a small, abandoned storage room behind the hospital, a place most people ignored. It wasn't much, just a concrete floor, a few broken shelves, and a small flickering light. But to Clara, it was a palace, compared to the unforgiving streets outside. Inside, James set about making a corner as comfortable as possible. He found some old blankets in a dusty closet and laid them on the floor, then tore a section of his own coat to drape over her wet shoulders. Clara sank to her knees, exhausted, her body trembling from the cold and the trauma she had endured. She finally let herself cry, the sound muffled by the walls around them. James didn't speak for a long moment. He simply sat beside her, silently holding space, letting her sorrow pour out without judgment. He thought about the injustice of the world, about the man who had turned his own wife away in the rain, and a quiet anger simmered beneath his calm demeanor. Yet, more than anger, there was a determination to protect this fragile life, Clara's life, and the life growing inside her. It was in this small, forgotten room, under flickering light and the relentless sound of rain, that Clara felt a flicker of hope ignite. For the first time in hours, maybe even days, she felt someone cared not out of obligation, not because they had to, but because they chose to. As Clara huddled under the blankets James had given her, shivering but slowly regaining some warmth, fragments of her life replayed in her mind like an unrelenting storm. She remembered the early days of her marriage, when her husband, Mark, had seemed kind and promising, a man who made her laugh and promised her a life filled with love. But slowly, cracks appeared. Arguments over money, late nights, and cruel words became the new normal. The love that once felt safe had turned into a cage, and her pleas for compassion were met with indifference, or worse, hostility. She thought of her unborn child and the fear that gripped her whenever Mark's anger flared. How could someone so close bring such pain? How could she face the world alone, with a tiny life depending on her? James watched her quietly, noticing the faraway look in her eyes, the subtle flinch whenever she shifted, as if bracing for an invisible blow. He understood he had seen suffering before, in hospital rooms and on the streets, but the raw, unfiltered pain in Clara's eyes cut deeper than anything he had encountered. He didn't speak immediately. He simply sat there, letting her relive her memories. Because sometimes, words only interrupted the healing. But as the rain pounded against the walls, he finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "You're not alone anymore. Whatever he did, whatever you've been through, it stops here. You have shelter tonight, and I won't let anyone hurt you while I can help." Clara's eyes met his, a mixture of disbelief and something she hadn't felt in years' trust. It was fragile, tentative, but it existed, and for James, that fragile spark was enough to know he couldn't turn away. In that small room, surrounded by shadows and the endless rhythm of rain, the bond between them began to form, a bond born not from obligation, but from humanity, courage, and the quiet defiance of a man determined to save a life, no matter the cost. By the early hours of the morning, the rain had not relented, and Clara's exhaustion began to take a dangerous toll on her body. Her breathing was shallow, and she clutched her belly with a grimace of pain that made James's heart tighten. He had seen patients in worse conditions, but the helplessness of watching someone so fragile suffer outside the sterile walls of a hospital hit him differently. Every minute spent outside proper care could risk both her life and the life growing within her. He knew that waiting was not an option. The storm outside mirrored the chaos inside him, the city's rain pounding relentlessly, thunder rattling in the distance, yet he couldn't let fear stop him. He had to act. With careful hands, he helped Clara up, supporting her weight as best he could. "We're going to get you help," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the sound of the rain like a lifeline. Clara's lips trembled as she tried to protest, but James's steady gaze left no room for refusal. Together, they stepped back into the storm, the wind and rain lashing at their faces, soaking them instantly. James wrapped his coat around Clara again, shielding her as they moved through the streets toward the hospital's emergency entrance. Every passing car splashed icy water over them, and every gust of wind seemed to threaten to knock her over, but James refused to let go. He felt the urgency of the life she carried, each step a battle against exhaustion and exposure. Inside the hospital, he guided her to the emergency intake, explaining to the nurses what had happened, how she had been abandoned in the storm, and how critical it was that she receive immediate care. Clara, weak and shivering, leaned against him, tears mixing with rainwater as she whispered broken words of gratitude. In that moment, the janitors so often overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated became the difference between life and death. He had no riches, no title, no social status, but in that rain-soaked night, he embodied everything that truly mattered: courage, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to save a life that the world had tried to cast aside. Clara's brief respite was shattered the moment the hospital doors swung open. A tall figure, wet from the lingering drizzle, stormed through the entrance, his face twisted in fury. It was Mark. The man who had abandoned her in the storm, leaving her to fend for herself while carrying their unborn child, now appeared like a shadow from her worst nightmares. His eyes scanned the room, landing on Clara, and then on James, whose calm but protective stance immediately put him between Clara and the danger that had finally caught up with her. Mark's voice rang sharp and accusing, cutting through the steady hum of hospital activity. "What are you doing with her? How dare you interfere?" he barked, his anger barely restrained. Clara's body froze, a mix of fear and disbelief, making it difficult to speak. She wanted to scream, to demand that he leave, but the words wouldn't come. James's hands were steady, his eyes unwavering, as he faced the man who had caused so much pain. "She's safe here," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And as long as I'm here, No one's hurting her, especially not you."
Mark's expression shifted from anger to disbelief, and then to a dangerous mix of entitlement and rage.
He had never encountered someone like James before, a man with no wealth, no power, yet possessing a presence that refused to bow to intimidation. James's hands were steady, his eyes unwavering as he faced the man who had caused so much pain. "She's safe here," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument.
Nurses began to notice the tension and edged closer, but James didn't flinch. He knew that protecting Clara meant more than just keeping her physically safe. It meant standing tall against the man who had sought to control and harm her. For Clara, watching this confrontation, a mixture of fear and newfound hope swirled within her. In James, she saw not just a protector, but someone who refused to let her face the world's cruelty alone. And in that tense, charged moment, it became painfully clear that her life, her child's life, and the fragile trust she had begun to feel could all hang in the balance. Mark's fury filled the hospital room like a storm, his voice booming over the steady hum of machines and the startled whispers of the staff. "You think you can keep her from me?" he snarled, taking a step closer to Clara, his intentions unmistakably threatening. Clara's heart raced in her chest, her hands trembling, and she instinctively shrank back toward James. But James did not flinch. He stepped forward, placing himself directly between Clara and the man who had once vowed to love her, but had abandoned her when she needed him most. His eyes locked on Mark's, unyielding, filled with a quiet but fierce determination. "Back off," James said, his voice steady, calm, but carrying the weight of authority. "She's safe, and I won't let anyone, especially you, harm her or your child." Mark's fury faltered for a split second as he realized James was not intimidated. In that moment, the hospital staff moved closer, sensing the rising tension. But James subtly shifted his stance, silently warning them to hold back and let him handle it. He had no illusions about the danger he faced. Mark was strong, angry, and unpredictable. But James's mind was clear. Clara's life and the life inside her were worth more than any fear or consequence he could face. Slowly, carefully, he spoke again, his tone calm but commanding. "You've lost the right to hurt her. You threw her out in the rain. You abandoned her. I won't let you take another step." Clara, watching this, felt a mixture of awe and relief. She realized that for the first time, someone had not only defended her physically but had also confronted the injustice she had endured, refusing to let her fear dictate her life. Mark, sensing the unwavering resolve in James's eyes, hesitated, the first crack in his fury showing. And in that frozen, tense moment, it became clear that the battle for Clara's safety and her future was just beginning. With James standing firmly as the shield between the past's cruelty and the hope she had only just begun to feel. Mark's glare lingered like a storm cloud over the room, but after a long, tense pause, he finally stepped back, muttering threats under his breath. The hospital staff, now fully aware of the danger he posed, quickly intervened, guiding him toward the exit. Clara's knees trembled, and she sank slightly into the blankets, exhausted from the fear, adrenaline, and relief mingling inside her. James knelt beside her, placing a comforting hand on hers. "It's over for now," he said softly. "You're safe. Nobody can touch you here." Clara looked up at him, tears brimming in her eyes, and for the first time in days, she let herself believe it. She realized that safety wasn't just about a roof over her head, it was about the presence of someone willing to fight for her when she couldn't fight for herself. Over the next few hours, Clara slowly began to regain strength. Nurses checked her vitals, wrapped her in fresh blankets, and brought her nourishing drinks. But it was James's quiet, constant presence that truly comforted her. He told her stories to distract from the fear that still lingered, asked her questions about her childhood, and listened with genuine interest when she shared her memories. Slowly, trust began to bloom, not the fragile, tentative trust from before, but a deeper, steadier belief that there could be kindness, bravery, and love in the world. Yet even as Clara began to feel the warmth of hope, both she and James knew that this was only the beginning. Mark's shadow still loomed in the background, a threat that could return at any moment. But for the first time, Clara felt she had an ally, someone who would not let the past dictate her future, someone who would shield her and the child she carried, no matter the cost. And as the rain finally stopped outside, leaving the streets glistening in the soft morning light, a fragile but powerful sense of possibility began to take root within her heart. Days passed, and Clara's body began to heal, but the emotional scars left by Mark's cruelty remained fresh and raw. The hospital had become a temporary sanctuary, but she knew she couldn't stay forever. It was James who quietly suggested a plan, a safe place she could go once discharged, a modest apartment he had helped secure for women in need, a place away from Mark's reach. Clara hesitated at first, unsure if she could trust anyone outside the hospital walls. But as she looked at James, his calm, unwavering gaze, and the quiet strength he exuded, a glimmer of hope stirred inside her. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she could breathe freely, where her child could grow without fear, and where she might even feel safe enough to smile again. When the day came for her to leave the hospital, James was there, helping her into a warm coat, carrying her few belongings, and walking with her through the city streets that only a week earlier had been her nightmare. Clara noticed the little things, the smell of wet pavement, the soft glow of street lamps reflecting off puddles, the faint hum of life moving forward despite the storm. With each step, she felt a cautious sense of empowerment, a feeling that the world was not entirely cruel, that there were people willing to stand for justice, compassion, and love. James remained by her side, a constant presence, guiding her without overbearing, giving her space to regain control over her life while ensuring she was never alone. And as they reached the small apartment, a modest, sunlit space with a small kitchen, a cozy bedroom, and a sense of quiet security, Clara felt something she hadn't in years: relief. She realized that freedom was not just about leaving the past behind. It was about taking the first steps toward a future where she could live with dignity, hope, and the knowledge that she would never face life's storms alone again. For a few precious days, Clara allowed herself to breathe. The apartment was quiet, safe, and filled with small comforts: a hot shower, a warm meal, and the steady presence of James, who checked on her regularly without making her feel dependent. But the fragile peace was shattered one evening when a loud banging echoed against the apartment door. Clara froze, her heart hammering in her chest as memories of rain-soaked streets and Mark's fury surged back. James appeared at her side instantly, his eyes narrowing as he moved to block her from the door. "Stay behind me," he warned calmly, sensing the danger before it fully revealed itself. Mark's voice slashed through the door, dripping with malice. "You can't hide from me forever!" he shouted. Clara, trembling but determined, took a deep breath. For the first time, she felt a spark of courage ignited by James's unwavering protection. She stepped slightly forward, meeting Mark's furious gaze with a mixture of defiance and fear. "I am not yours to control anymore," she said, her voice shaking but steady. James kept a hand on her shoulder, grounding her, giving her strength. Mark's anger swelled, but the sight of the two of them, Clara no longer helpless, and James no longer intimidated, forced him to pause. That pause, brief as it was, allowed the authorities James had contacted earlier to arrive, summoned quietly as a precaution. The police intervened, escorting Mark away, while Clara watched, relief and adrenaline flooding her senses. She realized that fear could no longer dictate her life. With James standing beside her, she felt a newfound power, proof that courage, protection, and the will to survive could push back even the darkest shadows of her past. The days following Mark's removal were filled with quiet moments that allowed Clara to finally breathe without fear. For the first time in months, she could focus on herself and the life growing inside her. She spent mornings by the small apartment window, watching sunlight filter through the curtains, feeling warmth where only fear had lived before. James was there most of the time, not hovering, not imposing, but present in a way that reminded her she wasn't alone. He helped her with errands, cooked simple meals, and listened when she spoke about her dreams, her fears, and the painful memories she was trying to process. Clara found comfort not just in his presence, but in the patience and respect he showed her, treating her not as someone to be rescued, but as a human being deserving of dignity, care, and agency. Each passing day chipped away at the heavy weight of the past, leaving room for hope and trust to take root. One quiet evening, as Clara rested on the couch, with her hands gently cradling her belly, James sat across from her, quietly sipping tea. The small apartment, modest and unassuming, had become a sanctuary, a place where scars could slowly fade and courage could bloom. Clara looked up at James and, for the first time, allowed herself to speak openly about the fear that had haunted her for so long. "I was so afraid that I'd never be safe, that I'd never be happy," she whispered. James reached across, placing a reassuring hand over hers. "You are safe," he said softly, "and you deserve to be happy. No one has the right to take that from you, not him, not anyone." Tears rolled down Clara's cheeks, but they were no longer tears of fear, they were tears of relief, gratitude, and the dawning realization that she had survived, that she was loved in ways she had never imagined possible. That night, in the warmth of the small apartment and the quiet strength of James's presence, Clara took the first true steps toward reclaiming her life, knowing that the storm of the past could no longer define her future. The weeks passed, and Clara's strength continued to grow. The apartment that once felt like a temporary refuge had become a home filled with small joys, soft blankets on the couch, a few plants by the window, and the gentle hum of daily life. She spent her mornings organizing the space, setting aside a small corner for her unborn child, carefully arranging a crib, soft blankets, and tiny clothes she had purchased with James's encouragement. Each small action was a declaration that she would survive, that her child would grow up in safety, and that the past could not steal their future. James was always nearby, quietly helping without making her feel incapable, offering advice on practical matters, and even sharing stories of his own struggles to show her that life could be rebuilt, piece by piece, after trauma. His patience and kindness were steady anchors in her life, giving her confidence that she could face whatever challenges remained. One afternoon, as sunlight poured through the window, Clara sat in the small nursery corner, feeling her baby move for the first time. Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear, but from wonder and gratitude. James quietly joined her, kneeling beside her with a soft smile. "You're going to be an amazing mother," he said, his voice sincere. Clara looked at him, overwhelmed by the depth of trust and care that had grown between them. "I don't know what I'd have done without you," she admitted, her voice breaking softly. James squeezed her hand gently. "You didn't need to do it alone, and you still don't. We're in this together." In that moment, surrounded by the quiet warmth of their small home and the promise of new life, Clara realized that true strength was not just surviving the storms, but allowing oneself to be supported, loved, and protected. The fear of her past began to dissolve, replaced by hope, courage, and the knowledge that she could finally look forward to a future filled with life, safety, and love. For weeks, Clara's life had begun to settle into a fragile rhythm: quiet mornings, afternoons preparing for the baby, and evenings spent in peaceful conversation with James. But the calm was shattered one chilly evening when a shadow appeared at the apartment window. Mark, his face twisted with anger and desperation, reminded Clara that the past she had worked so hard to escape was never far behind. Her heart raced, a wave of fear threatening to overtake her newfound strength. She instinctively moved toward James, who stood immediately at her side, his posture protective, unwavering. "Stay behind me," he said softly but firmly. his eyes locked on Mark. Clara realized that while she had grown stronger, her safety still depended on the unwavering courage of the man who had saved her life. Mark pounded on the door, shouting threats and accusations, demanding that Clara open it. James calmly reached for the phone, contacting the authorities who had previously intervened, while keeping a firm hand on Clara's shoulder. "You will not touch her. Not now. Not ever," James said, his voice carrying the weight of conviction. Clara, feeling a surge of courage she hadn't known she possessed, stepped slightly forward. "You have no power over me," she declared, her voice shaking but steady. The defiance in her words, paired with James's unwavering presence, created a barrier Mark could not break. Within minutes, police sirens echoed in the distance, and Mark's furious threats turned to curses as he realized the futility of his actions. The authorities arrived, escorting him away for good this time, leaving Clara trembling, yet stronger than ever. In the quiet aftermath, she sank into James's arms, overwhelmed by relief and gratitude. The storm had passed, not just the literal storms, but the dark, destructive force Mark had represented in her life. Clara finally understood that true protection and strength came from standing together, facing danger head-on, and refusing to be intimidated by the ghosts of the past. The days following Mark's final retreat were filled with a quiet rhythm that Clara had not known in years. She began to organize the apartment, preparing for her baby's arrival with a sense of purpose and determination. Soft blankets, tiny clothes, and a small crib took shape in a sunlit corner, each item a declaration that she was building a life on her own terms. For the first time in months, she felt the freedom to breathe, to make decisions without fear, and to envision a future filled with hope rather than anxiety. James was always nearby, assisting gently, never overbearing. He helped with practical tasks, carried groceries, and even taught her how to properly install the crib. But more than his assistance, it was his presence, steady, patient, and kind, that gave Clara the courage to fully embrace the life she had almost lost. As they worked side by side, small moments of connection blossomed into a deeper bond. Clara caught James's soft smiles, the quiet humor he shared, and the unwavering support that never faltered even in moments of stress. She realized that she wasn't just building a safe home for her child, but also constructing the foundations of trust and companionship in her own life. In the evenings, they would sit quietly, sharing stories, discussing hopes for the future, and reflecting on the storms they had endured. Clara's heart, once hardened by betrayal, began to soften, filled with gratitude and a tentative but growing affection for the man who had risked everything to save her. And as she rested her hand on her belly, feeling the life inside her, she knew that the journey ahead would still hold challenges, but for the first time, she felt ready to meet them, not alone, but with someone who had proven that true courage and compassion could illuminate even the darkest paths. Though Mark had been removed from the apartment and authorities were aware of his actions, Clara could not entirely shake the shadows of fear that still lingered. Every unexpected noise, every knock on the door made her heart race. But this time, she faced it differently. She had learned that fear did not have to control her life. James had taught her, not through words alone, but through his unwavering presence, that strength could come from courage, preparation, and trust. On a cool evening, when the city outside was quiet, Clara felt her first true surge of independence. She took small steps around the apartment, arranging the nursery, preparing meals, and even making phone calls to ensure the baby's safety and future. Each action, no matter how small, became a declaration that she would not allow past horrors to dictate her life. James watched her, silently proud, understanding that the strongest protection he could offer was not shielding her from the world forever, but empowering her to stand tall within it. In the quiet moments between them, their bond deepened, a mix of gratitude, trust, and a tenderness that neither had expected. Clara began to smile more freely, laugh softly, and share dreams of a life filled with hope. She envisioned holding her child in her arms, feeling the warmth of family, and moving forward without the constant shadow of fear. James's steady guidance and compassion had not only saved her life, but had also illuminated a path toward courage, resilience, and love. And as they stood together, looking out at the city bathed in twilight, Clara realized that the storm was truly behind her. What remained was a life she could finally shape on her own terms, strengthened by the knowledge that she was never truly alone, and that love, in its purest form, had the power to heal even the deepest wounds. The sun rose softly over the city, casting golden light across the apartment that had once been just a temporary refuge. Now, it was home, a place filled with warmth, laughter, and the quiet promise of new beginnings. Clara cradled her newborn in her arms, marveling at the tiny fingers and perfect features that seemed to embody all the hope and resilience she had fought so hard to preserve. The months of fear, betrayal, and uncertainty had led to this miraculous moment, life triumphing over despair. Tears rolled down her cheeks, not of sadness, but of relief, gratitude, and awe at the fragile, beautiful gift she now held. James sat beside her, eyes glistening with pride and tenderness, a steady hand brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. Words were unnecessary. They had lived through storms, both literal and emotional, and their bond was a quiet, unshakable understanding forged in fire. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the battles that had raged within these walls. But inside, Clara's world had been rebuilt from the ruins. Mark's shadow was gone, finally stripped of its power, leaving only the freedom Clara had longed for. In James, she had found not just a protector, but a partner in courage and compassion. And as she held her child close, feeling the soft heartbeat beneath her hands, she knew that true strength was not only surviving life's storms, but allowing oneself to be loved, supported, and brave enough to reclaim a future. The storm had ended. A life once threatened was now reclaimed, filled with hope, safety, and the quiet, enduring power of love that could heal even the deepest wounds.